There is a couple of other things happening before John has to go off and spend the rest of between now and Christmas watching I'm a Celeb for work reasons, happening, which do bear some attention. And the first of them is on page 16, where Boris Johnson's former chief of staff confirmed to the COVID inquiry yesterday that the former Prime Minister did indeed say, let the bodies pile high, when he was talking about whether to have another lockdown. Now, here is a short montage of what Boris himself said about that when these claims were first reported.
Prime Minister tell the House categorically, yes or no, did he make those remarks or remarks to that effect?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, and I think the right honourable gentleman is a lawyer, I'm given to understand. I think that if he's going to repeat allegations like that, he should come to this House and substantiate those allegations and say where he heard them and who exactly is supposed to have said those. Who exactly is supposed to have said those things, Mr. Speaker?
Insists the public don't much care.
I'm finding that a lot of this stuff that people are talking about is actually not what's coming up on the doorstep, or the issues that people are raising with me. What people want to know about is what is the government doing to get on with our agenda to unite and level up across the country.
But people do want to know whether Boris Johnson said he'd let the bodies pile high in their thousands. Did he say it?
No, but again, I think the important thing I think people want to...
Downing Street has denied the...
Well, he denied it repeatedly, it's got to be said. And John, I mean, there's no comeback for Boris on this, really, is there? Because he's not an MP anymore. The right-wing rag for which we both used to work and which now employs Boris Johnson is unlikely to question him about this too hard. It's not like we didn't know he was a liar. Perhaps not even news. Does this revelation really matter, do you think?
Well, in some ways not, because, I mean, I'm not sure anyone is shocked anymore that maybe Boris Johnson doesn't always tell the truth. We obviously had that investigation by the Commons into whether he told the truth over Partygate, and their report found that he lied again and again and again and again over that. So I don't think anyone should be particularly surprised that he wasn't always truthful. However, the thing that I would say is, yeah, he might not be an MP, so they can't hold another investigation to prove yet again he was not telling the truth. But anyone who is left on the Tory benches with any kind of small bit of hope that Boris Johnson might one day make this great return, I think that should surely be over now. Anyone like Nadine Dorries, who was desperate for him to come back as PM, I think that those hopes will finally be faded, and that the evidence that keeps coming out over the COVID inquiry, whether that's WhatsApp messages, whether that's emails, or whether that's diary entries, they've all been pretty damaging for the government. And one of the really damaging bits has been this diary written by Sir Patrick Vallance, who was one of those two scientists that we used to see at those press conferences alongside Boris Johnson.
Yeah, he was the other one, wasn't he? Yeah, Chris Whitty, that everyone knew.
Chris Whitty, and there was Patrick Vallance, yeah. And Patrick Vallance appears to have written this diary the whole time, basically working all these hours and then going home and writing down notes of what was said in different meetings. And those have been the really damaging bits. So yesterday there were excerpts of the diary read out, and Patrick Vallance hasn't actually appeared himself yet at the inquiry. And when those bits of the diary were read out, it was talking about this meeting that Boris Johnson had held with Rishi Sunak. And this was when they were looking at, it's after the first lockdown when cases started to go up and up again. And he was saying that Rishi Sunak was basically pushing Boris Johnson around. He said that Boris Johnson would be quite sensible. He would be on board with reality, what was happening. And then he would hold a meeting with Rishi Sunak. And then he'd suddenly be all over the place, saying that Rishi Sunak was using all these spurious arguments about why bars and restaurants shouldn't shut down. And so, yeah, I think it is quite damaging for Boris Johnson. But I think the thing that is potentially really damaging, that has kind of been there bubbling away but hasn't properly come to the fore yet, is there is going to be a lot of stuff in there about what did Rishi Sunak do to stop a lockdown coming in place, and how did that impact people losing their lives.
Well, exactly. That's the thing. It's Rishi Sunak that matters, and he was at the heart of all this. But there are other cabinet ministers involved too. And that video montage, which we should say thank you to Best for Britain on Twitter, which sort of put it all together, and we nicked it this morning, was also featured former ministers like Ben Wallace, who of course also is no longer a minister, but Therese Coffey and Michael Gove, who are still in government. Dazza says, sack them all. There are some people still in government who came out and backed Boris and said he didn't say it. It didn't happen. It wasn't an issue. And I don't know if Rishi Sunak ever denied it as well, but it is perhaps more important that Rishi Sunak featured in that evidence. Mike says, seemingly sensible ministers like Ben Wallace supported Johnson in denying he said it, so they were either conned by him or implicit in it. The evidence that is about Sunak, like you say, there is some about him. It just hasn't been given, perhaps because he's not as exciting as Boris Johnson is. He's not been given the same kind of attention. Wait, he is going to be giving evidence shortly, isn't he? When's that coming up? And are they going to go quite hard on them, do you think? Are they treating them tough at the COVID inquiry, or are they letting them have a bit of a soft ride?
So I think we'll probably see Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak in the next several weeks. The COVID inquiry is basically set into these different sections, these bits called modules. So the first one looked at preparations for the pandemic. Did we have enough masks in kind of warehouses, stuff like that? We're currently on the second one, which is looking at how did the government react? What was their response like? What were their decisions on things like lockdown? And so at some point in this section, we will hear from Matt Hancock, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak. I think that if you look at the last few evidence sessions, particularly last week when we had high-profile people like Dominic Cummings, the grilling was pretty firm. They were quite robust in going through different emails, as we say, different WhatsApps that people have said. It was quite uncomfortable last week when the barrister on behalf of the inquiry was asking Dominic Cummings, had you ever been misogynistic towards colleagues in Downing Street? And he said, no, not at all. And then you could almost see the slight grin on the lawyer's face when he kind of got the papers together and then read out all these messages and emails that Dominic Cummings had sent, which were misogynistic. And so I think if I was Rishi Sunak particularly, I would be slightly concerned, thinking what emails, what messages, what diary notes from Patrick Vallance do they have that they could suddenly whip out at this COVID inquiry? And I think that is the moment when people really will pay attention to Rishi Sunak and what he said. At the moment, he's competing in the news with all the colourful language that Boris Johnson used. So yesterday in the notes, it was talking about how he said that another lockdown would be like a whiskey and revolver moment, how he thought that new kind of restrictions would be medieval. He's always got this very colourful turn of phrase, which always gets attention. Yesterday, we heard about how it was true that he'd offered early in the pandemic to go on live TV and get injected with COVID. We had that revelation last week about how he'd asked the scientists if it was possible to get rid of coronavirus by shoving a hairdryer up your nose. So Boris Johnson is very good at getting attention. I think when that moment comes, that is Rishi Sunak stood on the stand answering those questions with a lawyer going systematically through all these bits of evidence with him, I think that is the moment when a lot of people in the country will pay attention to what exactly did he do in the pandemic.
Yeah. Now, Leslie says, will anyone be prosecuted following this? It's not about gathering evidence for a prosecution. It's about, learning lessons, Leslie. So the aim isn't to prosecute anyone. I'm not sure that there is much to prosecute individuals for. It would be something that you would prosecute if you were to bring any kind of a claim. It would be about, corporate manslaughter by an organisation, for example, rather than an individual. So it's not a case that, one person's going to get locked up for something. Rachel says, Rishi and Boris losing their WhatsApp messages is disgusting. We all know that's not true. My 16-year-old son could get them back. Ring the inquiry, Rachel. I think actually the inquiry's managed to get a lot of WhatsApps now because Boris finally managed to figure out his PIN code, which, as we all know, was 8008, because why wouldn't he have boob? Now,